and for some reason refuse to concede that you inherently have more freedom in single-player games than multiplayer.
Because you just don't. What would it have to have for you to say multiplayer games are better?
That's a really interesting question.
I don't think you're wrong, but also, I think you're wrong.
Let me go back at you one more time, Max.
Oh no, my hands are up. You have caught me. Now, Josh, I think it's clear as day for anyone that multiplayer games are significantly better than single-player games.
I would disagree with that. I do enjoy myself a fair few of multiplayer games. Obviously, we play a lot of co-op games with the boys, and it's great fun. I really enjoy them. However, if you put me in a corner and say, Josh, you got to pick either single-player or multiplayer games for the rest of your life, I'm going to be picking single-player because I just feel like those experiences mean a lot more to me than the multiplayer games we play that are kind of, great experiences, but they kind of peter out after a while.
Now, that's an interesting point you make. I also really like single-player games for the stories that they can tell. In the same way that I would choose to read a book over, say, an interactive friend experience. I don't know. However, multiplayer games are what I enjoy doing most. I like being with people and I like being around people. So when I have the opportunity to do that at home and play games with people, there's nothing like that. And I know you think that because we always play it. But there's just something about how much better multiplayer games are compared to single player. They're just it's so good.
I feel like, though, what you're kind of missing out here when you argue in favor of multiplayer over single-player games is the kind of use case for video games, at least for me. Normally, we're going out, we're playing cards at a mate's place or something like that, and then you come home, and the last thing on your mind after doing a big social event, at least for me, is coming home and playing more games with those friends, right? It's kind of like a break. And so the reason I regard single-player games so highly is because whilst multiplayer games with friends are really fun, and we obviously have tons of fun experiences doing that, I would just personally rather be with my friends in person, playing card games or going out on a drive or something like that, because the social connection seems to be more significant there. Whereas with multiplayer games, like, yes, talking to your friends, but it's kind of like limited to the game, and it's great fun. But if I have to choose between single player and multiplayer, I would choose the circuit breaker in the form of single player games, because naturally I'm going to go out with my friends and we're going to go do fun adventures together normally. And then I can come home and load up a single player game to kind of relax, chill out, and be in that universe for an hour or two. And that's kind of my, I guess, relaxation process. Yes. And as a result, I find myself preferring single-player games overall.
And that's fair. There is absolutely nothing wrong with wanting that. However, I really must direct your attention to the quality of the games that you can get in multiplayer versus single-player. I'm not going to sit here and say one is better than the other in an objective sense, but when you're looking at the experiences you can get in, say, Counterstrike, or we've played Factorio, which is not inherently a multiplayer game, but
Factorio is a great multiplayer game, though, isn't it? It does work out well for multiplayer.
It's a brilliant single-player game, but it is so much better as a multiplayer game, in my opinion. Then we've got other games that we have played, like Pico Party, which was just you essentially trolling the rest of us, and then you pinning on everyone else because you're an asshole.
Well, I had fun with that. I don't know if you guys were enjoying the experience just as much as I was, but yes, it was a ton of fun.
That's where the fun of multiplayer games comes in. You get to experience that, which you probably wouldn't. Like, you can't exactly kill your mates in real life. Hey, it doesn't quite work like that. You can't force your mates into a hole because you're trying to be funny. That doesn't quite go very well for you in real life.
You could do that. You'd just be a bit psychotic. But nonetheless, I think with Factorio, you've chosen a bad example there. Not because Factorio isn't a great multiplayer game, because it is. And it was tons of fun us playing on that Factorio server, and we've had tons of great
Cold War recreations stories.
We recreated the Cold War. It was fantastic, right? However, that argument is inherently flawed because I actually think Factorio, if you want to experience the game as intended by the developer, I actually think single player is a better medium for that, because without a doubt, the multiplayer environment brings many shenanigans, but ironically, those shenanigans often take away from if you're trying to experience the game itself. And what I mean by that is, in single player Factorio, you have limitless autonomy over how you want to build every aspect of your factory. Whereas in multiplayer, whether you're cooperating with people or you're trying to build on your own, you're kind of limited by space. You don't have that kind of same freedom to customize how the game works for you. And as a result, you could argue that multiplayer Factorio is inherently quote unquote worse, even though it is still tons of fun. And that's kind of why I lean more into single-player games, because I kind of have freedom to do what I please when I please, and I don't have someone like yourself, Max, jabbering in my ear constantly to tell me what to do. You know, I kind of like to do my own thing once in a while. And yes, you can't kill your friends in real life, but I mean, there are plenty of activities that are kind of gamified in real life that I think would be more fun. Like, for example, paintball or rock climbing. These are things you can do in games. Obviously, shoot guns in games at each other. But in person, I think that would be, if I had to pick between the two, I'd pick the in-person interaction over the multiplayer game every single time.
See, here's where I think you're just wrong. I played Factorio with two other groups. We actually have a common goal in my other games. We're a very communist society in that way, which I know scares you to death. So at work, at lunch, we played Factorio for probably about a year straight there. That's a lot of time in it. And not once did I ever think, wow, the people that I'm playing with take away from this experience. In fact, they add to it because their expertise is different to mine. Mine was, building up these massive factories and finding intricate ways to make everything fit and just being sort of like a heavy lifter when it comes to making these factories. But then my mate would do all of the distribution networks, and then my other mate would do circuitry and all the tedious things that I didn't care about, like, creating concrete and all that crap. So I think you're trying to make an objective statement for such a tiny little subset of this particular game. But beyond Factorio, multiplayer games provide so many more experiences that you wouldn't get otherwise.
My argument is centered around freedom of choice, right? Which is what single player grants you. What you just said is, I think it was fine because we all work together for a common goal. What if your common goal is different to mine? What if I want to do multiple things, but someone's already taken care of it? Well, it's
then I
kind
guess
of
you could...
redundant, isn't it?
Not
or
necessarily.
What if, more so, and this is a real-world example from our playthrough, what if someone does something entirely inefficient, takes up more space than they should? Normally what happens in Factorio, if someone's better or someone has a more optimized way of doing something, is they tell you and then they change it, right? If I'm in single player, who's going to tell me to optimize my creation? Well, no one. The only person that can choose that is me. And so inherently, objectively, whether you think it's single player or multiplayer is better, objectively, you have to admit that more freedom comes with playing single player.
I think you even realized midway through your argument there that what you were saying kind of made no sense. What you were telling me then, honestly, was that when you're in a multiplayer scenario with other people around you, you have to rely on, you have to work completely in tandem with those people to do the same thing. You went off on your own by your own choice because you were sick of our communist society. You chose to do everything inefficiently compared to us because we sat and we did research. We looked at efficient factory design. We collaborated. We pointed out each other's flaws and said, here's what you can do better. Whereas you only had one brain. You had one brain. I'm sure you did your research at certain parts, but you had one brain contributing to it. And surely teamwork makes the dream work. Because if you're just sitting here arguing with yourself, no one's probably going to watch that.
Nothing you said there countered any of my argumentation. Like, my argumentation surrounding more freedom in single player versus multiplayer, nothing you just said counters that at all. But to go on that argument, I mean, yes, I went away and made my own free society, and it was wonderful, and we had tons of fun in multiplayer, and then Connor stole my power, and he was a bastard. But regardless, ironically, you've kind of proven my point there, because I left, made my own society, and because of that, because it was in multiplayer, I was capped at what I could do. I was kind of constrained into a borderline where I had very limited oil and very limited resources. And like I said, it was still very fun, but if I'm talking about single player grants you more freedom, then inherently I have less of it in multiplayer, just by nature of there being more players, less resources for me, less for me to be able to do. And yes, you're right, it's better for multiplayer to have more opinions and more brains working to optimize things. But if I don't want to do that because the fun for me is doing it on my own, then once again, single player grants me that freedom, and nothing in your argument countered that whatsoever. Now, of course, once again, you can make the argument that less freedom is better and is more fun in multiplayer. That's fine. But my argument was about freedom, and you didn't counter that at all, which is kind of telling for your argument, Max. I think it's kind of weak to say that multiplayer is inherently better than single player based on no empirical factors whatsoever other than, I just enjoy cooperating with others. Like, that's kind of a new point, isn't it?
No, not necessarily. I don't think so. Player freedom. Very, very interesting topic, that one. A lot of single player games are story-based, and a lot of those are linear. Significant portion of those. Yes, there are exploration in your favorite ones, such as Skyrim and Fallout 4. Absolutely, New Vegas too. All of those have wide open worlds that you can explore at your own pace and do those sort of missions. And you could choose to do them at your pace as well. So I understand your argument there. However, multiplayer games have potentially more freedom because you not only have a goal that you probably are all working towards, like in Pico Park, where you have to get to the end, but there are multiple ways to do that. And it adds a layer of depth when you're talking about playing with other people because you have more options in some circumstances. You chose to make our lives significantly harder in Pico Park.
I did.
For fun. And it was very funny. No one forced you to do that. You just chose to be can't say that word, a dickhead. To sit there and say you have more freedom in single player games, yes, because you aren't held to anyone else's standards, but to make an objective statement like that is just wrong. You cannot say all multiplayer games have less freedom than single player.
Well, I find it interesting that you dodged your own example there about Factorio. Like, once again, you kind of sidestepped that, then immediately went and pivoted to single-player games, which I think is kind of a concession from you that, yes, in Factorio, if you go multiplayer, you have less freedom. But ignoring that fact, I would say that the examples you just provided are also pretty limited, right? So in Pico Park, it's a multiplayer game, so it's not like you can play through that game single-player, but as it's a multiplayer game, you are inherently constrained by what the others in your group want to do. So if the others in your group want to approach a problem and then they agree, 3-1 of how to solve this problem or how to go about it, you have literally nothing you can do other than troll because you can't make the decision yourself. Whereas in my favorite games, you pointed them out, Skyrim, Fallout New Vegas, Witcher 3, I can go wherever I want. I can attack an NPC. I can not attack an NPC. I can choose this story path. I can choose that. The only arbiter of how I go about playing that game is me. And so to try to sit here, I thought you would go about this argument way differently. I thought you would say multiplayer games are more fun because of the social banter or this or that. Instead, you've picked a hill to die on in freedom in gaming, and for some reason refused to concede that you inherently have more freedom in single player games than multiplayer.
Because you just don't. You just don't. I would say they're equal. I would say they're equal.
They're not equal, though. Please counter the point I just made about how if I'm in a multiplayer game and one party in the group wants to go this way and the other two agree, and it's a game like Pico Park, how is it that I can then change that direction and say, no, actually, we're going this way? I can't. I'm limited by the constraints of the game.
The Pico Park example is a brilliant case for player freedom. All of us, I recall there were 7 of us in that game. 6 of us wanted to do it one way. And you, you bastard, you intentionally got in our way at any opportunity.
And we died repeatedly, right?
Yes, you did. Eventually, we got to the goal because we got so mad at you and you gave up.
Because I cooperated with what you guys wanted me to do, right?
Absolutely.
So therefore, less freedom because I had to go along with the preordained
had to go along with the goal of the game. I'm hearing the argument. I'm hearing the argument here that you do not want to play the game in the best way possible. You want to just sit
perfect.
there. Right, that's incredible. That is crazy.
Max,
from you.
You've just proven my point there. Yes, I find fun in games by not playing them in the perfect constrained way. And as a result, I have less freedom when there are other people in the multiplayer game that want to play it in the optimal constrained path, right? So inherently, I have more freedom in single player games.
Perhaps you caught me. Oh no, my hands are up. You have caught me. I don't think I can continue to counter this in any productive way. So I instead will take your advice and go on to the social aspect. Where's the social aspect in single player?
Yeah, so the social aspect in single player is non-existent. 100%. If your goal for games and how you derive enjoyment from them is purely on a social basis, where you have friends and you're bantering and you're laughing and you're having a good time through that means, 100% single player is not the way to go because you're just not getting any enjoyment from, an NPC. It's just not going to be the same. But as it's the case that for me, my primary purpose for games, obviously we play multiplayer games on occasion, but we also go out every week and we see each other in person. And so when I come home from those gatherings and those social events, I don't want to play a multiplayer game. I want to play a single player game because the reason for gaming for me in that instance is relaxation. And I want to recharge my batteries. I don't want to exert it again. And so whilst I enjoy multiplayer games and we very often play them, I still prefer single player games because I'm actually able to avoid that social interaction and just kind of have an hour to myself and chill out in a world constructed by some developers. And so, yes, 100%, I take your point. You cannot be as social or any social at all, to be honest, playing a single player game. But for me, that's actually a benefit, an argument in my favor of why single player games are better.
Fair enough. And that's one of those things that I simply cannot argue against, because that's your own personal choice, even if in some circumstances I would disagree with you. But there are times where I would rather just sit and play a single player game. Maybe everyone else is busy and I'm at home sick. That does happen from time to time. Games that we can play multiplayer are very wide reaching, I would say. There's a lot of variety we get to play in this modern era of gaming, which is absolutely brilliant. If there could be a dream multiplayer game that would change your mind, what would it have to have for you to say multiplayer games are better? Because that is something I'm genuinely curious about.
I think there is an example of this. I can't praise the game in its current state, but back when Destiny was around, that was a game you could play solo or multiplayer, but the solo experience and the multiplayer experience were kind of inherently separated. And so the way it worked was, it's kind of different to games like Minecraft or Factorio, where the single player and multiplayer experience are separated entirely. Like, if you want to play multiplayer, you play multiplayer. If you want to play single player, you play single player. In Destiny, they were merged but separate in a very dynamic and hybrid way. And that is probably an instance where I would concede that that game being multiplayer made it better. So with Destiny, I could do my whole routine of relaxing by grinding on my own. I could just go on my own and put on a podcast and kill mobs and get it loot and equip that loot. That kind of ironically fueled the multiplayer side, because then when I would go do a raid, which would require social cooperation and being in a voice chat with friends, when the boys wanted to play, I could jump on and we'd do a raid together using the loot I had acquired through grinding in single player. So that's probably an instance, a game like that being released again for the time span that I'm playing it would push me over the hump in playing a multiplayer game, quote unquote.
What I pitched to you, the point that I want to make to you in order to try and pull you over, to at least try to get you to change 1% of your mind. And I think I actually already did with the Destiny example, which wasn't even my intention there. You gave me a much better answer than I was expecting.
That's fair enough.
Fair enough. What I'm wondering, what I think can actually tip in your favor is what memories do you value more? Let's go deep here. Let's go deep. What memories do you value more? Do you value the ones with your friends, or do you value the ones that you make on your own in these worlds? And neither are wrong. I'm just curious. I'm just pushing here.
That's a really interesting question, because I do really value when we play multiplayer games, and very often what happens is, if something funny happens, like in Lethal Company or whatever, we use the NVIDIA clip function, to capture the last 30 seconds of something funny happening, and we put it in the Discord, and it gets pinned, and it's kind of immortalized there forever. You can always go back and watch, me screaming like a little girl in Lethal Company, and that, so inherently, I do value those memories a great deal, and that's why I will always enjoy playing multiplayer games with you guys. However, I would never say that I value those at a greater extent than something like, for example, right, Witcher 3, that ending, gosh, being with those characters for hundreds of hours in such a sincere, well-written story, that's going to be something that will stay with me for, the next decade, next 2 decades, next 3 decades. And so I do see the value in both as opposed to just one over the other. And I don't necessarily think one matters more to me than the other. I kind of just think they're both very meaningful memories in my mind.
That seems respectable to me. I can't argue against that. I can't disagree with anything that you've said necessarily, but I will I continue to die on that hill, even if I can't argue against it, that multiplayer games will have the same amount of freedom as single player games in certain scenarios.
Well, you're wrong, so let me go back at you one more time, Max.
Let's keep on this topic. I think we could continue on this, because I still think that you're wrong.
With multiplayer, you said earlier you love certain story single player games. Let me ask you this. If those story games, like, I don't know, The Last of Us, or a story game that's kind of on rails, right? Where you're kind of watching cutscenes and interacting and listening to character dialogue. Do you think if me and our dear friend Connor were sitting next to you when you were playing The Last of Us, it would have had the same effect?
No, it wouldn't. Absolutely not. But that's because you're just sitting there. You're not playing the game you're not in the game with me.
But what I'm more saying is, if our voices were constantly like, Max, who's this character? Max, why are they doing that? Max, blah, blah, blah. You might not only get annoyed, but it might take away from the dialogue you can hear if you're just playing by yourself and listening to the audio. It might take away from the story beats that are meant to be serious, and then me and Connor are taking the piss the whole time. You know what I mean?
This seems like a very extreme example, but I'll entertain it regardless. Look, I mean, yes, absolutely. It absolutely would take away from it. But where it actually matters in a single player game, I know of like 2 multiplayer games that are very story based that actually would be affected by that sort of crap you're pulling. But when it comes to the combat scenarios in Last of Us, I think you've actually picked a really poor example there, because that game would be, maybe it would be different. And I think I'd have more fun if it were a multiplayer experience, because you get to approach your combat scenarios so much differently. And if you scale up the difficulty, if you ramp your difficulty levels up, you'd all have very limited ammo, and so you'd have to work together in order to take down the baddies. And so I think in The Last of Us's example, yeah, the story might be impacted a little bit, but that's just because you two are goofballs. I respect it, with all due respect to both of you. I would not choose to play Last of Us multiplayer with you guys. I think that would be something that you wouldn't enjoy, and it wouldn't be something that I would enjoy personally.
What's like the core reason for Last of Us? What's like the goal of the game? Because in my mind, I would
tell
think
a story.
Exactly, to tell a story. And so if that's the case, anything that distracts you out of the story, in my mind, would be a slight negative.
Yeah, well, I mean, yes, inherently, because that game is designed to be single player, and it had no ideas for multiplayer. So I think you're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
You're trying to say the social element of multiplayer games makes them better. So if I were to take a single player game and put it in the multiplayer space, if your theory were to hold, it would be better. But this is an example where that theory is incorrect, no?
In our specific context, 100%. When we're talking about playing a fairly serious single player story-driven game, you guys would be probably fooling around a lot, but I think there'd be a lot of fun in that. I mean, there was a multiplayer mode on Last of Us for a little while there on the PS3 era, and that was good fun because you got to approach these combat scenarios with other people in a really fun, unique way. And so I think the gameplay is significantly better, and if I played it with the right people, respectfully again, then I think that the game could actually be a different experience, maybe better in some ways, but also it would just be more fun with the combat, in my opinion.
That may be so, but if the core goal of the game is story, I mean, you kind of argue there from a combat perspective or gameplay perspective, but it does sound like it would inherently hurt the story at least a little bit. And as that's the case, I feel like there's kind of an admission there that single player experiences, at least some of them, especially story experiences, are better in single player rather than multiplayer. And as that's the case, Max, I think you've got to concede at least a little bit, man, that the single player experience is somewhat superior.
Okay, in certain scenarios it is. In this specific one example that you're giving, yeah, 100%. But I just want to check what you're saying here. Do you believe that story games are better as single player?
If the game is a story game, quote unquote, yes, I think so.
Okay. Do you believe that there are exceptions to that?
Probably, yeah. I mean, I presume you have an example, so I look forward to hearing what that example is.
It Takes Two and A Way Out.
Would you say It Takes Two's goal is a story game, or would you say It Takes Two's goal is being a co-op game?
I think it's both. I would actually argue it's both, because they are linear on-rail storytelling games where what actually drives your actions is the story.
The reason I ask is because I actually, funnily enough, bought my girlfriend's brother a copy of It Takes Two for his birthday to play with his girlfriend. And I remember them playing the game, and I was curious because they were like, I didn't realize that the game had any story. I didn't realize that, but clearly there was. And I asked him, like, oh, what's this about? And he said, I don't know, we just play the game. I don't think that is a very universal opinion from you when it comes to whether the game is more weighed to co-op or story. I do think it clearly has a story. Like I said, I saw it on the TV screen. Clearly there is some story there. But whether or not the primary focus is story or co-op, I would say it definitely leans more towards the co-op side of things, for sure.
I mean, I think you should. I'll give you a little break there, because I don't think you've played either of them, right? You haven't played the full thing. Am I correct?
No. I've never played the game.
I'll
never
give you
played It Takes
I'll
Two.
give you a little break there because I have to say I think that statement is incorrect personally. But also you've not played it, so that's fair enough. I just have to say that I don't believe that to be correct because when you're looking at the definition of what a story game is, in your admission, they're on rails, right? Not all the time. Sorry, not all the time.
Not all of them.
Sorry, correction, not all the time. But one part of a story game could be that it's on rails. So this A Way Out gives you a few little different scenarios to approach give a given place, but it is primarily story driven. Everything that happens is based around story beats and moving your overall goal forward. I think A Way Out is probably a stronger example of a story game. It Takes Two probably leads more heavily into the co-op side of it, but they are both still primarily co-op story games. Regardless,
Co-op story games.
Co-op story games. Correct.
Co-op.
Yes.
I would say that cooperation, it's kind of ironically, I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure cooperation and getting along together is kind of a core story theme of It Takes Two, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so, ironically, I do feel like that game is more centered towards cooperating through co-op gameplay. And as a result, I don't know if you can make the argument you're making.
What? What did bro just say? Can you give that one more shot? Because I am not following. I might be stupid.
So
here,
you're saying,
not
I asked you originally, what is the core focus? What is the core goal of It Takes Two? And you said story. And I said, no, I think the core focus is co-op. I think it's about having a game that you can play with your spouse or friend in a co-op environment with co-op gameplay. And you said, no, it's story. And then I just illustrated that the entire story of the game is kind of, and you agreed, is kind of based around the idea of cooperation with your partner. And as a result, I feel like it definitely is more centered when it comes to the goal, the intention of the game, around goal than story. It may have a great story, but I think the core primary goal is still co-op.
I'm trying. That was more of a. I think the illustration is that game is significantly better because it is a co-op game. The story is centered around it being a co-op, and it needs that co-op element to be a good story.
Well, for my girlfriend's brother, for him, the story was irrelevant. He played it with his girlfriend, and their whole focus was on the gameplay.
And in the same way
that's the case, could you say if I was playing The Last of Us, right? If I played The Last of Us. Presumably, the gameplay is great. I've heard great things about it, including part of Last of Us Part 2. People say the gameplay is excellent. But I would struggle to find anyone that would say, for Last of Us Part 1, Part 2, it kind of is like an anomaly because the story, I think many people would say, is garbage, ironically. But for Part 1, where everyone agrees the story is fantastic, I think you would have a very hard time finding one or two people out there in the world. If we went with our little like mics and interviewed people, I think you'd have a very hard time finding someone that played that game solely for the gameplay. I think that would be very difficult to do.
Solely for the gameplay? Fair. But it is a sort of... It is a looter shooter in a way. You're scavenging for materials to get into the next encounter in order to survive it and upgrade your gear as you go along. And so I think that there could be players out there who play Last of Us in the same way that your girlfriend's brother played It Takes Two. I genuinely do believe that. The people that skip the cutscenes, there's a reason you're allowed to skip cutscenes. It's because to some people, it doesn't matter to them. They don't care about the story. That's their choice, and that level of freedom is absolutely core to a gaming experience. If you do not wish to care about the story, I think you're missing out on the first game story. But for me, when it comes to Part 2 story, I'm happy to skip some cutscenes that I don't care about. It doesn't matter to me, and I love to do all the extra bits and pieces with the gameplay, but I don't care about the story as much as I do Part 1. And so I don't think you could make such a wide-reaching statement in supporting that multiplayer single player games are better. I'm just not hearing your argument there.
Well, I think that the skipping cutscenes thing is kind of a misnomer because one of the things that I've heard is great about The Last of Us is the replay value. You can replay at different difficulties and it actually changes things in the gameplay. And so I think the skipping of cutscenes is actually there for multiple playthroughs. I don't think someone that is only interested in, say, Call of Duty or a third-person action game would have purchased Last of Us with the intention of just playing the gameplay and skipping every cutscene. I think probably, I would take it back. There's probably one or two people out there, but I think en masse, if you were to survey the entire population that played that game, I think it would be such a minuscule degree or amount of people that it would kind of debase your entire argument. But look, I'll put an olive branch out here for you. I do love multiplayer and co-op games. They are fantastic. Some of the best memories ever came from them for me. We enjoy playing them on the regular. They are great. But single-player games, for me, are always the relaxation kind of circuit breaker I need in my life after a long-ass day. I need that, and I don't think I could get the same thing from multiplayer. Therefore, for me personally, my preference is single-player. Max, what say you? What are your closing arguments and thoughts?
Very, very interesting conversation we've had here today. I think I think that everyone is entitled to their own opinion, even if that opinion is wrong. No, I absolutely respect that. You need your own time. There is no problem with that, none at all. But I do think you saying objectively that single player games are better than multiplayer games is not quite the right way to be approaching it. Obviously, we need to be pitching against each other in order to make an interesting conversation here. But I think the correct answer from both of us would be they both have their ups and downs. It's just I prefer to play multiplayer games because I enjoy the social aspect. I would rather play a game of Counterstrike alone than and talk to people than sit there and play a single player game 90% of the time. Okay, and so I don't think you're wrong, but also I think you're wrong.
Hey, look, fair enough. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. Personal preference. All right, there are no objective better than when it comes to these things. And so, people watching at home, you're probably sitting there and have your own opinions. Obviously, you've listened to about 40-something minutes of us going back about this very subjective topic. And so, I have to ask you, people watching this now, put a comment below of who you think's right, who you think's wrong, who do you agree with more, and why do you like either multiplayer or single player games, and tell us why below, because we will actually read them. We're not like these scammers out there that have pretend like they read shit. No, we actually do. So
and we don't use AI to respond to your comments.
Yeah, like some losers out there. Anyway, no shade.
We also want to know, what points did we miss? What are some things that you could argue in this exact discussion? What would you say proves your point? We're interested to hear.
That's right. Tell me and Max we're both idiots, and let us know below. Thank you so much for watching.
Bye-bye.